I trusted my nephew with my business. He pushed me out, so I took everything back. I was 60 when I finally admitted that the long days were catching up with me. My knees felt stiff every morning, and the climb up the narrow stairs to my office took more effort than it used to. I had run Keller Packaging Supply for more than 3 decades, and the place had grown from a rented garage to a steady small-town operation with a loyal customer base. I still cared about every order, every pallet, every machine that rattled in the back room, but I knew I couldn't keep the same pace forever. I didn't want to retire. I just wanted the workload to ease a little. That was why I started thinking more seriously about my nephew, Evan Keller. He was 33, sharp with computers, and always talked about modern systems and faster processes. He had been working with me for years, and he liked to say the shop was full of potential if someone pushed it harder. I used to smile at that. I thought ambition was a good sign. We had a small board, just 3 of us. Me as majority owner, Evan as a minority stakeholder, and my longtime accountant who helped us keep things steady. Our structure was simple, nothing fancy, but it made sure decisions had some formality behind them. It kept the place grounded. My senior employee, Paula Mercer, had been with me for more than 20 years. She handled scheduling, deliveries, and half the shop's day-to-day rhythm. She never asked for attention, but she kept things moving with quiet reliability. Whenever I wondered if it was safe to loosen my grip on operations, I reminded myself that Paula was still there. That always helped. So when I started feeling worn down in the late afternoons, I let Evan take on more responsibility. First a few decisions, then a few more. He seemed eager for it, and I told myself it was the natural next step. I didn't see any harm in stepping back a little. Looking back, I realize I trusted him because he was family, and because I wanted to believe he saw the company the same way I did. I thought he understood the years it took to build it. I thought he respected what I had done. At that point, I had no reason to imagine anything different. It didn't take long for Evan to start reshaping the place the way he always talked about. At first, it seemed harmless. He reorganized schedules, adjusted shipping routes, and pushed for quicker turnaround times. He kept saying the company needed a sharper edge, and I tried to stay open-minded. I told myself this was exactly why I had given him more space, but the tone shifted faster than I expected. He began asking for broader administrative access, saying he needed full control of the updated software systems. I agreed, thinking it was part of his plan to modernize the operation. What I didn't notice at first was how each new change quietly pushed me further away from the decisions I had made for years. The first real sign came when he explained that my salary had been temporarily reclassified. He presented it as a procedural step during the transition, something the new system required. There was no formal vote, no board discussion, nothing that made it legitimate. It was just a change he pushed through inside the software, hoping I wouldn't question it. He said it would all settle once the new structure was in place. I wanted to believe him, so I didn't challenge it right away. Then he started encouraging me to spend more time at home. He said the shop ran smoother when responsibilities were not split between 2 leaders. He said efficiency depended on clear authority. At first, it sounded like advice. Later, it felt like pressure. Within a few weeks, I found myself outside the daily rhythm of the business. I no longer received updates about incoming orders. I wasn't included in vendor calls. Even small operational questions went directly to Evan instead of to me. It was as if the place had quietly shifted hands without any real discussion. The employees tried to stay neutral, but I could tell they sensed the tension. Some avoided eye contact when I stopped by. Others acted unsure of who they were supposed to report to. The shop felt different, and not in a good way. I kept telling myself he was adjusting too fast, that he was simply eager to prove himself. But a part of me already knew something was off. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. The first few weeks away from the daily routine felt strange. I tried to convince myself that stepping back was good for me. I worked in the garden, read the newspaper more slowly, and took longer walks around the neighborhood. But the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt like something was shifting behind my back. Customers started calling me at home. Some had been with us since the early days, and they never complained without reason. They said orders were arriving late, or the quantities were wrong, or the packaging wasn't sealed the way it used to be. I tried to reassure them, saying Evan was implementing new systems and adjustments took time. Still, the calls stayed in my mind long after they ended. A few employees reached out privately as well. They didn't want to get involved in family matters, but they wanted me to know the atmosphere in the shop had changed. They said Evan rushed decisions and pushed everyone to move faster without giving them the details they needed. No one said anything dramatic. They were just worried, and worry from people who rarely complain carries weight. Paula was more reserved. She told me everything was different, but she stopped there. She didn't want to sound like she was taking sides. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, though. It wasn't the steady tone she usually had. It was careful, almost guarded. One comment stayed with me more than the others. A younger worker mentioned quietly that Evan wanted to prove he could run the place better than I ever had. He didn't say it directly to me, but hearing it secondhand made it sting a little more. It explained the urgency, the shortcuts, and the way he kept edging me out. I tried to keep my mind calm, but the pile of small concerns grew heavier each day. I knew the business well enough to recognize when something wasn't lining up, and if things were going wrong, I was still responsible as the majority owner. So one morning, after another restless night, I decided to drive to the shop without warning. No call ahead, no message. I just needed to see the operation myself, to find out whether my worries were real or just the noise of a man who wasn't ready to slow down. When I walked into the shop that morning, the first thing I noticed was the silence, not the calm kind, the uneasy kind. People were working, but no one looked relaxed. No small jokes between stations. No steady rhythm from the production line. Everything felt rushed and scattered. Inventory was stacked in the wrong places. Boxes meant for afternoon deliveries sat unopened near the loading dock. Labels were mismatched. Even the service desk looked disorganized, with forms piled in uneven stacks as if someone had been scrambling to keep up. It didn't look like a system in transition. It looked like a system slipping. When Evan saw me, he gave a brief nod and walked the other way. No greeting, no explanation, just a quick glance and a fast exit toward the office. He didn't come back out, not once. I could feel the distance he was trying to create, and it told me more than any conversation would have. A few employees looked at me with tight expressions, the kind that say they want to talk but don't dare. One worker quietly pointed toward a pallet of mixed stock that shouldn't have been mixed under any circumstances. Another shrugged helplessly when I asked how long things had been this way. No one came right out with details, but their faces said enough. Later that afternoon, I received a short message from Evan. He told me visits during peak hours caused confusion and that I should trust his process. He said stepping back was important for efficiency. The tone was stiff, not respectful, not open. It was the kind of message you send when you're afraid someone is about to uncover something. As I walked to my truck, I saw Paula waiting near the edge of the lot. She looked unsure at first, almost as if she had decided not to speak and then changed her mind at the last second. She said she had noticed unusual expenses and inventory orders that didn't match our normal patterns. She didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. She just said things were off, and she couldn't explain why. Her words weren't dramatic, but they carried weight. Paula wasn't someone who reacted to gossip or small concerns. If she felt uneasy, there was a reason. And standing there in the fading light, I knew I couldn't ignore what I had seen inside. I drove home from the shop that night with a feeling I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger yet. It was responsibility. The kind that settles on your shoulders when you realize something is slipping under your watch. I had stepped back, but I was still the majority owner. And that meant I still had a duty to the company, the workers, and the customers who trusted us. The next morning, I used my authority as board chair to request full access to the financial records. The accountant restored my system permissions, and within an hour I was looking at the books myself. I had reviewed company records thousands of times over the years, and I knew the patterns by heart. This time, the patterns were broken. Vendor charges were higher than usual with no clear reason. Some receipts were missing entirely. Several orders looked duplicated or altered, and a new line appeared in the expense list, consulting fees paid to a dormant company with no history of providing anything to us. The amounts weren't huge, but they were irregular, and irregular entries always mean something. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the screen. My first instinct was to think the worst. But the deeper I looked, the more it seemed like carelessness disguised behind technical language, not deliberate theft. It was sloppy. It was irresponsible. It was enough to create problems with taxes, with vendors, even with regulators if anyone reviewed the books closely. I realized I couldn't let a single additional dollar move without oversight, so I used my authority to freeze discretionary spending. I shut down access to the consulting payments. I restricted Evan's financial permissions to basic operational tasks. None of this required his approval. It was the right of the majority owner, and I exercised it without hesitation. As I worked through the documents, I opened a folder and began sorting hard copies into labeled stacks: vendor issues, unexplained fees, missing receipts, and questionable orders. I wanted everything clear and traceable. If we were heading toward a confrontation, I needed the facts in order, not scattered across screens. By the time I finished that afternoon, I had a growing pile of evidence that something inside the company had gone wrong. And I knew I couldn't handle it quietly. Not anymore. I met with my accountant early the next morning. He had been with me since the early days, back when the company was just a cramped warehouse with a single delivery truck. He knew the books as well as I did, and he didn't need much explanation. I handed him the folder of documents, and he started reviewing them one page at a time, quiet and focused. I watched his expression as he went through the records. He didn't react right away. He never did. But after a few minutes, he let out a slow breath and said the numbers didn't line up. He pointed to the duplicated vendor charges, the missing receipts, and the consulting fees sent to a company that appeared inactive. He said the pattern looked negligent, not criminal, but still serious enough to cause real trouble if left unaddressed. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that he didn't see signs of intentional theft. Frustration that Evan had been this careless with systems he barely understood. My accountant explained that improper entries could trigger tax issues or require amended filings. He said that if the consulting line stayed, auditors would question it immediately. And if vendors discovered errors, they might reconsider their contracts with us. None of this was small. None of it could be ignored. He suggested we prepare for a formal board meeting, not a casual talk, not a family conversation. A documented, structured meeting that followed the rules we had put in place years earlier. He said it was the cleanest way to reestablish control and correct the mistakes before the consequences grew larger. I sat there for a moment, thinking about how things had changed so quickly. Just a few months earlier, I had believed Evan's ambition would help the business. Now we were discussing risk, exposure, and procedures to regain stability. It wasn't how I imagined things would go when I stepped back. I gathered every document, sorted them carefully, and placed them into labeled folders. I made copies of each record, storing one set with the accountant and keeping another at home. I wanted everything protected and ready for the meeting. Before I left, he reminded me that acting quickly was the only responsible choice. The company needed direction, and the board needed clarity. It was time to address the problem directly. I scheduled the board meeting for the end of the week. It was a simple process since the board was only 3 people, but the formality mattered. It sent a signal that this wasn't a casual discussion or a family disagreement. It was an official step to protect the business. I sent out the notices and included the agenda: financial irregularities, operational concerns, and a review of management authority. Word spread through the shop faster than I expected. The employees didn't know details, but they sensed something was coming. 2 senior staff members, including Paula, asked if they could provide statements about the recent changes. Not to sit in as observers, just to speak during a designated slot. Given the situation, I agreed. Their perspective was part of the truth, and the board needed to hear it. Evan confronted me 2 days before the meeting. He didn't raise his voice, but there was tension in the way he spoke. He said calling a board meeting was unnecessary and that any issues could be solved privately. He said transitions were always messy and that I was overreacting because I wasn't used to stepping back. He talked fast, as if trying to outrun his own uncertainty. I listened, but I didn't cancel the meeting. When Friday afternoon arrived, the atmosphere in the conference room felt tight. The accountant sat with his folders organized in neat rows. Evan came in late, carrying a laptop and avoiding eye contact. I started the meeting by stating the purpose clearly. We needed answers, documentation, and a plan to stabilize the company. I presented the financial records one at a time: the duplicated charges, the missing receipts, the irregular consulting payments. I explained how I had reinstated oversight and restricted financial access to prevent further mistakes. Everything was factual, nothing emotional. When I finished, I asked Evan to explain each entry. He shifted in his seat and said the charges were part of his plan to accelerate growth. He claimed the consulting fees were tied to outside advice, though he didn't provide any written agreements. His explanation felt thin, not malicious, but careless in a way that didn't fit the responsibility he had taken on. After he spoke, I invited Paula into the room. She described the rushed orders, the confusing instructions, and the inconsistent purchase requests she had seen. Nothing exaggerated, just the truth as she experienced it. As she stepped out, the room grew quiet. The facts were on the table. Now it was time for the board to decide what came next. Evan sat there with his arms tight across his chest, as if he was bracing himself. He kept the laptop open in front of him, but he didn't use it. It was more like a shield than a tool. When I asked him again to clarify the consulting payments, he said they were part of a growth initiative he hadn't fully documented yet. He said the outside advice came from a contact who preferred informal arrangements. There was no contract, no emails, no proof. The accountant responded in his usual calm way. He said the lack of documentation violated every guideline the company followed. He said misreported expenses could lead to penalties and required amendments. He pointed out that informal payments to dormant companies created the appearance of concealment, even if the intention wasn't dishonest. He kept his tone steady, but the meaning was clear. Evan had crossed a line, even if he didn't mean to. Evan looked down at the table, tapping a finger against the laptop cover. He insisted he was trying to make the company grow faster than I ever did. He said the business needed bigger risks and more aggressive decisions. He said I had built a good foundation, but progress required bold steps. The words sounded rehearsed. They didn't match the evidence in front of us. I told him the issue wasn't ambition. It was the lack of structure, the missing records, the way he had bypassed the systems meant to protect the company. I explained that the business could survive slow growth, but it wouldn't survive instability. I said he wasn't being punished for trying something new. He was being held accountable for letting his pride outrun his skill. Then Paula and the senior worker were brought in one at a time. They spoke carefully, describing the rushed contracts, the unclear purchase orders, and the last-minute changes that left the staff scrambling. No one accused him of anything personal. They just explained how the ground had shifted under their feet since he took control. Their statements added weight to everything already sitting on the table. Once they left, the accountant reviewed the bylaws. He explained that the board had full authority to remove operational control from any manager whose actions jeopardized the company. The rule had existed long before Evan ever joined the business. It was the kind of protection I had put in place years earlier, hoping it would never be needed. The room felt still as he finished speaking. Evan didn't argue. He didn't threaten legal action. He just stared at the documents, the numbers he couldn't justify, and the consequences he hadn't expected. The board took the vote. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply necessary. Evan stood up as soon as the vote was finished. He didn't slam the chair or raise his voice. He just closed his laptop slowly and kept his eyes on the floor. He said he wanted another chance, but the words sounded thin, almost like he already knew it was too late. When he realized the decision was final, he gathered his things and stepped out without looking back. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after he left. My accountant closed his folders and gave a small nod, the kind that meant we had done the right thing, even if it didn't feel good. It wasn't victory. It wasn't relief. It was responsibility settling into place again. I walked back through the shop floor afterward. The workers noticed me, though they tried not to stare. Some gave small nods. Some stepped a little straighter, as if something heavy had just lifted off their shoulders. No one said anything directly, but the mood was different from the last few weeks. The tension that had been hanging in the air wasn't as thick. I spent the next few days reviewing open orders and checking inventory myself. The mistakes were there, but they weren't beyond repair. Some shipments needed correction. Some invoices needed clarification. I called vendors one by one, explaining the delays and setting new delivery schedules. Most understood. They knew our reputation, and they trusted the stability we had always maintained. Inside the shop, I moved slowly at first. I didn't want to disrupt routines any more than they already had been, but with each day, things began to fall back into place. Labels went where they belonged, schedules steadied, even the machines sounded different, less rushed, more controlled. Paula stopped by my office near the end of the week. She didn't make a speech. She just said she was glad things were settling and asked what I needed from her next. There was a steadiness in her voice again, the same tone she used for years before everything became chaotic. It told me we were on the right path. By the second week, the shop felt familiar again. Not perfect, not fully recovered, but steady. And steady was enough. It meant the company was back under clear direction, grounded the way it used to be. As I locked up one evening, I realized I wasn't thinking about retirement anymore. I was thinking about rebuilding and protecting what I had nearly handed away too easily. It wasn't about pride. It was about responsibility, something I had learned the hard way never truly leaves. The audit took several weeks to complete. I met with the auditors twice, and each time they showed me clear, organized summaries of the problems. The consulting payments were careless, not fraudulent. The duplicated entries came from rushing through the system without checking vendor codes, and the missing receipts were the result of skipped steps, not hidden theft. It was negligence, serious, preventable, and harmful, but not criminal. When the final report arrived, I read it twice. The findings didn't excuse anything, but they clarified the truth. Evan hadn't meant to deceive anyone. He had tried to move fast and cover his mistakes with shortcuts, assuming he could fix everything later. But businesses rarely work that way. Small errors snowball. Rushed decisions ripple through every corner of an operation. I asked him to meet with me at the office after the audit closed. He arrived quietly and sat across from me, tired and tense. He didn't defend himself this time. He said indirectly that he wanted to show everyone he could take the company into a new era. He admitted he had been overwhelmed and didn't want to tell me when things started falling apart. There was no anger in his voice, only regret. I told him plainly that the company couldn't risk another episode like this. Trust had been shaken, confidence had been strained, but I also told him that I believed in accountability, not condemnation. If he wanted to stay, it had to be in a limited, project-based role with no financial access and no operational authority. He would report directly to me, and every decision would be documented. It wasn't a punishment. It was a boundary. He nodded slowly, accepting the terms without argument. It wasn't the future he imagined for himself, but it was a chance to rebuild what he had damaged. Whether he would use that chance wisely was something only time could reveal. After he left, I walked through the shop again. The workers were focused, the orders were steady, and the place felt grounded. Not louder, not busier, just steady. That was the measure I cared about now. Taking the company back didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a reminder that experience has a weight younger ambition can't replace. I had stepped back too soon, trusting that drive alone could guide a business. Now I knew better, and the company was safe again because of it. Thank you for listening to my story on elder vengeance. Please like this story and subscribe to the channel.